Hi, everyone who's already logged in. It's 12 o'clock exactly. We're going to let a couple more people log on in case they were in meetings up till the hour or grabbing a bite to eat or doing whatever they're doing. In the meantime, I'm going to alert you to our next webinar. If you haven't registered already, our next webinar will be on December 4th. It's with Joanna Neves. I'm probably butchering her name, and I apologize in advance, Joanna. She is an attorney who understands marketing beyond all means. She'll help you identify things you could and should measure, the metrics of what matters for your law firm, and how you can take those calculations and apply them towards your budget for marketing, staffing, and growth planning. So please sign up today if you haven't already. And I'm a new host. Kelly Chan had to leave the office for something. So this is Talia Wise. I am the Product and Marketing Communications Manager here at CEB. You may have remembered me from the interview we did last week with Mitch Jackson, the very lively interview. Today, I'm going to be introducing Jen Lee. I'm so sorry, Jen, who's sitting here right next to me. Jen is a debt and credit strategy attorney. She's the owner of Jen Lee Law Incorporated. Her company helps individuals and businesses develop strategies to reduce financial stress due to debt and credit and increase productivity, as well as understand legal rights and options. She is also the creator of the Lawyer Success Network, an online community to help lawyers produce products network and come up with their new practice ideas. And Jen, before I introduce you completely, because I'm sure some people want to know where that online community is that an open community?
Yeah, it's lawyersuccessnetwork.com.
Okay, lawyersuccessnetwork.com, and I'll make sure that we post it.
And there's a Facebook group that's open to everyone.
Oh, excellent. Yeah. So without further ado, I'm going to turn over the commands to Jen. Please know that you could submit questions through the Q&A, which is in the black bar, or through chat. And we will address them towards the end of the conversation. Welcome, Jen. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And please submit questions, because listening to me talk for an hour is not nearly as much fun as finding out what your burning questions are when it comes to finding clients and getting paid. So as Talia mentioned, I am a debt and credit attorney. In the real world, I'm a bankruptcy attorney. Part of my marketing and the way I find clients is I don't use the B word. And so that's kind of where I come at this from, is I don't use the word bankruptcy in any of my marketing. And I encourage you to sign up for the next webinar with Joanna, because she's going to give you tools to measure what I'm talking about today.
Okay, we're just having a couple technical errors, so we'll get right through that.
Trying to get to the next screen.
There we go. Okay. That's hard.
So before we can talk about how to find clients, the first thing you have to know is, who is your client? It's really hard to find ideal clients if you don't know what you're looking for. It's kind of like a shot in the dark sometimes. And a lot of attorneys tell me, oh, I'm looking for anyone who has a debt problem, or I'm looking for anyone who needs an estate plan. That is not an ideal client. So do you know your ideal client? The important part of knowing and identifying your ideal client is what words they're using to find the problem. And we run into this problem all the time as attorneys, because we're boxed into these professions of, I'm an estate planning attorney, I'm a family law attorney, I'm a bankruptcy attorney. But a lot of times our clients don't use those words to search on Google or to ask a friend for a referral. So that's how I changed to debt and credit. And the way that whole thing came out, because it's an interesting story, is I do a lot of student loan work. So there's a lot of things that can be done with student loans for repayment plans and that kind of thing. And I kept having clients come in my office that say, well, I didn't know if you could help me, because you say you're a debt attorney. I don't have any debt. I just have student loans. So in their minds, student loans weren't a debt. It wasn't like credit cards. It wasn't something they were embarrassed about, but it was something they needed help with. So you really have to figure out what your ideal client is using for those words. And there are all kinds of marketing coaches out there who will help you narrow down the demographic you're looking for. They'll even get down to what's the best age of client for you and what's the best occupation for them to have. I've narrowed mine down to, I love 50-year-old clients who own their own business. A lot of my bankruptcy clients were saving their business from going out of business by using bankruptcy. And so that is my ideal client. And you have to speak their language. clients and ideal clients will relate to you better, and they'll be more willing to pay you if they can understand what you're saying. So one of the exercises I like people to do is, your 30-second elevator speech sounds like this cliche thing out there that everyone tries to practice. I help people with blah, 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 blah. And so make sure whatever your blah, 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 blah is, that it means something to your ideal client. It's something that they would say. I often say I help people with financial stress. And I have a stuffed elephant that I carry with me, because I tell people the elephant in the room is that we all have financial stress and no one wants to talk about it. But people remember that stupid elephant. So no matter what I do, they remember that one thing. So you have to have an answer that people are going to remember, and make sure it doesn't sound like every other attorney who does what you do. You have to be different. So I always talk about lawyer stereotypes. And the biggest compliment I get from people is when they say, well, you don't act like a lawyer, you don't sound like a lawyer, or I didn't think that this isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. So people think lawyers are expensive. They think lawyers are unaffordable to the average person. There's lots of legalese involved. They're snobby, hard to relate to, condescending, and uncaring are the ones that I hear all the time. And the way I've heard this is, when I meet with a client, I will usually ask, how many other attorneys have you talked to? Because most of the time they've gone to a couple others or shopping around to see what's going on. And the one thing I hear most often than not is that the last one was so condescending and so hard for me to even relate to that I couldn't imagine paying them more money to talk to me like that. So if you can overcome some of those stereotypes and be a normal person, that often will help you get paid and find clients as well. Reputation gets around. A lot of current clients refer future clients to me because they have gone through the process and figured out that I'm not expensive once we explain how everything gets paid, and that I'm not condescending. I don't make people feel like they have a big L or a loser on their forehead for having to come and find help. Because anyone who's looking for attorney services has a problem. That's why they're looking for you. So I often tell people, try to get around those stereotypes and be that person people want to talk to. So what makes you different? For me personally, I have a stuffed elephant named Bernadette. Bernadette goes with me everywhere. She is my brand. She has her own Facebook page. She has a website. People remember her name before they remember my name. That's what makes up a great brand. And I tell a lot of new attorneys, you should find something that makes you different that you can trademark. Because all attorneys who have their own practices should have a trademark for their firm. I have a couple different trademarks I have an employer program that I launched a couple years ago that's trademarked, and I am working on trademarking my podcast, which is called Debt Therapy. And so how people remember you is your brand. And what problem do you solve for them? And a lot of times, my clients come in very stressed. They have issues because the financial stress is weighing on them. Emotionally, there's a lot of issues involved. They're scared, they have stigma, and their relationships have huge problems. So a lot of times, if you approach your client's problem from how you can solve it, that's your first step to get in the door with business development. If people are like, oh, I didn't realize someone could help me with that. I hear that all the time. So if you can figure out what problems you solve or what problems you could solve, that's part of your brand and a superpower of business development. Okay, so now we talked about the ideal client. The reason why I started with that was because if you don't know your ideal client, business development and finding them is really difficult. You could just throw it to the wind and hope something comes at you or comes your way. And the big part of business development is solos and small firms go through these really high highs and really low lows sometimes, where your income is good, and then all of a sudden your operating account is down to zero and you're wondering how you're going to pay your rent this month. And so the point of business development, with how I practice it and how I teach others to do business development, is to make it consistent and repeatable, so that you always have a flow and you're not worrying about where your next client is going to come from. Once you get that system in place, Then Joanna at the next webinar is going to tell you how to measure all that with the return on investment that you're making towards all of these different business development. So when it comes to business development, networking is probably the best way to get quality clients. So there are two schools of thought out there when it comes to practice. One is high quantity and lower quality, and one's higher quality and lower quantity. So they're kind of trade-offs. And if you're looking for high quality clients who are willing to pay you, networking is the best way to do that. The reason for that is they're coming from someone they trust. If someone refers you a client, they trust that person. They often won't shop around for other attorneys who do what you do. So if you get that in with the client right away, your chances of closing that are really high. So when you're networking, and I know networking is a buzzword and it's hard to put it into a container, but when you're networking, you should be looking for power partners and not clients. A power partner is someone who serves the same clients that you serve. So for example, I'm a bankruptcy attorney, even though I don't use the B word, and I go to a mixer, which for most attorneys is like the lowest of the low. We don't like going to mixers. We don't like talking to people. But I go to a mixer. The people I want to meet there are people like CPAs or accountants, because they're often looking at tax problems, and tax and debt go hand in hand. There are often financial advisors there, and financial advisors are looking at people's finances. So that's a good connection for me as well. Mortgage brokers are also a good connection, because someone goes and applies for a mortgage and their credit score comes back as too low. A lot of times that's a debt problem and not a credit problem. And so if I can train my power partners to identify those, then those are good sources for me. And it's repeatable. They will always be sending me people as they run across them, because they run across the exact same people. So when you go network, your goal should not be to see how many business cards you can get. It should be to find the right people that you need to introduce to others. Talk as little as possible when you network. Let them talk the whole time. They'll think you're wonderful. They'll think that you are hung the moon because they got to talk about themselves. No one's there to hear you talk, I promise. Everyone's in their mind thinking, how can this person help my business? If you switched around and be, how can I help their business? They're more often to remember you, and they'll also refer you right away because they trust you. So networking should be used to find resources. It's not about you at all. Networking is never about you. However, networking should be intentional and strategic. I have seen people go crazy with networking where they're doing coffee meetings 10 times a day, trying to just hit as many people as possible, and you get burnt out. Now, there are some at bigger firms, the rainmaking partner often is 95% of the time networking and meeting with potential clients and potential referral partners. But you should have a plan for networking. And I know that sounds scary. Everyone's like, I don't have time to create a plan. I'm trying to be 6 different positions in my company. It doesn't have to be a big plan. It just has to be intentional and strategic. So one organization that I'm in, we go to a monthly meeting. It's a networking group. And at that monthly meeting, they'll set you up with 2 others in the group to go have a smaller meeting with at a later date, a coffee meeting, a lunch meeting, or whatever. Ahead of time, I'm allowed to go through the list and pick who I want to meet with if I want to. A lot of people just do it randomly and they accept whoever they're assigned to. But because I want to be intentional and strategic with how I'm doing my networking, I will go through the list ahead of time and send my requests in so that I'm meeting with people that are actually going to be good resources for me and my clients. So that's what I mean by intentional and strategic. I don't mean just meet with whoever will meet with you. I very rarely meet with financial advisors these days because you can't throw a rock without hitting one. And a lot of them, no offense if there are any financial advisors around, but a lot of them will try to pitch you at that meeting. So you go to a coffee meeting, you're sitting at Panera or Starbucks or whatever, and you start talking about each other's business and how you can help. And all of a sudden they're asking you, so how's your insurance? How's your financial advisor doing? And you're like, whoa. I'm here to network and figure out how to refer clients. It's not for you to pitch me on something. That's the biggest turnoff with networking is if you have someone pitching you. So on the other hand, don't do that either. But attorneys don't generally do that because we're not really going to people and saying, so do you need a bankruptcy filed or something like that? It's not quite as common. So another option of business development. So we talk about networking. That's probably the best way to find your ideal client because you could narrow it down fairly quickly there. Being a known expert or a thought leader in your field is also right up there with networking. And different options for this, media quotes. If you can get quoted in a media, in an article online, or in a publication, that's really good for being known as an expert. On my website, I have a list of places I've been quoted in the media and articles I've written. It's under my media page. And the way I got started with that was there's a service called HARO, which is Help a Reporter Out. It's HARO. And they send you 3 times a day a list of all the reporters in the area, or nationwide actually, who are looking for some sort of expert. They want to talk about a credit card. They want to talk about tax debt or whatever is going on. And usually there's like 20 to 30 of them at a time. You can get a little overwhelmed with them. I tell people send them to a different folder so you don't get overwhelmed with all of these emails coming in. But if you go in there and you find a reporter who's looking for your expertise, respond back right away and say, hey, this is my area of expertise. This is how I would answer your question. Here is my information. Here's my background. Please let me know if you want to set up a time to talk. I've been in probably 20 articles through HARO requests because it was easy for me to respond quick to something I'm an expert at. The reporters will then often turn around and call you first when they need a quote. Instead of sending out that request nationwide, you become the expert for that reporter. So I was in Consumer Affairs last year, U.S. News and World Report. Magnify Money was, I think, the most recent one who called me about Chapter 13 bankruptcy, wanting to know some. And she was a repeat. She had talked to me before about another question she had. So media quotes are big, and you should put them on your website. You should be announcing when you're in the media. It should be on social media. You should share it because that's the purpose of it, is being known as the expert. The second part of that is writing your own articles, blog posts, and guest blog posts. So it sounds a little overwhelming. And I know everyone's always saying, I know I should be blogging. I know that's great for search engine optimization. But if you come up with an easy plan and you have a list of like 20 frequently asked questions that people ask you all the time in your business, it's really easy to have rotating blog posts to talk about those issues. I usually will sit down and can hammer out a blog post in like 15, 20 minutes because you're just writing, and you're writing for your clients. You're not writing a law school article. You're not writing a law review. You're writing an answer to a question that your client would have. And so it's all straightforward, easy to read English. You just type it out and then you go back and edit it if you need to, or have someone else read it. But I think people get caught in this mindset of business development and blog posting has to be this elaborate affair where I'm, spending hours on this 500-word blog post, and it really doesn't. The next one I talk about is videos. I hate being on video. It is like, I hate video. I will not watch videos. My phone's always on silent. So if I'm going through Facebook and I'm scrolling through, I won't stop for videos. I'll stop to read. I found out that I am the opposite of most of the world. Most people will watch videos. And so 4 years ago, I hired a videographer and did a whole bunch of monthly video series and put them up on my website and put them up on YouTube. And what do you know? All of my clients come in and talk about my videos that they saw on my website. And they parrot back to me the things that I say in my videos. So if you have frequently asked questions, it's okay to do a blog post and a video about it. There's a lot of repurposing content you could do. And I won't get too far into content development. That's a whole webinar we could do on our own. But put the idea of videos out there. The same line of videos as podcasts. I don't listen to podcasts either. I'm a reader. So the whole idea of audio, I don't do, but I found out my clients like podcasts. And so I did start a podcast called Debt Therapy. And it's just 15 minutes of let's talk about a finance topic that they didn't teach you in school. And so we go through and do that. And I've got a lot of response and new clients off of that. The next one's write a book. And then that sounds super scary. The way I put it on there, I was like, they're going to all freak out when I say write a book. It's not as bad as it sounds. a lot of it can be put together with the blog posts that you do and the videos and the podcasts. It's the same information. You're just compiling it in different ways. I had a book that came out in 2017 on credit card fraud. And that did propel my business very quickly because it became a credibility thing. And so now I'm a known expert in that field as well. And the final thing on there is your newsletter. My newsletter is everything above, just all combined into one monthly post. So I have a virtual assistant who does all of that, puts the newsletter together based on all of the content I created. So being a known expert is probably the way you're going to get known locally and even nationwide. I have clients nationwide now because of different quotes, different things like that. Speaking engagements. Once you're a known leader, speaking engagements are a really great way to find your ideal client and build business. So for a speaking engagement, you need to first find groups that need speakers, which can be hard. I have an agent who does this for me now, and she has connections and books me out to different groups. That's very helpful and has gotten me a lot of traction. The hard part for attorneys is to develop an interesting take on your practice area, because no one wants to hear about how a will or trust works. They do, but it has to be an interesting take on that. Or how a divorce works. It's kind of one of those topics where you're a little like, yeah. But if you come up with an interesting story, so I started talking about the elephant in the room, so I have my stuffed elephant, and talking about financial stress and how it's everywhere and no one wants to talk about it. So no one in the room was embarrassed by this topic, because then they were like, oh, other people are going through this too. I will say that you can come up with some really interesting topics. You could talk about famous divorces. I had a presentation I did before Trump became president on his bankruptcy, on his company's bankruptcies, because it was such a fascinating area that people were curious about and very misinformed. So if you have something that people come in and they're always saying something wrong, like I'm trying to think of it, they're always wrong. That's some misconception. Oh, I have one. People think their credit scores go down when they file bankruptcy, and that's actually not true. Wow. Most of the time, credit scores go up when you file bankruptcy. There's reasons behind it. So I have a whole presentation on credit scores talking about bankruptcy versus other options, because people have this misconception out there. So find an interesting take on your practice area and go with it. And it's okay to be different. I'm going to talk about in the getting paid part that it's okay to be different. Be prepared at your speaking engagements with handouts with your contact information on it, how they can get a hold of you, and useful information. Don't just give them like your business card blown up on a handout. Most of my handouts have things like 8 steps to take if your identity has been stolen, or things like that, something they're going to want to keep or pass on to someone else. I also recommend, if you're going to go the speaking engagement route for business development, that you have a speaking or presentation coach. If you've never done speaking in front of a group, and I was terrified, I'm an introvert by nature, but I did find that I really get energized by speaking in front of groups. So I had a speaking and presentation coach who helped me. She would be horrified by these slides, by the way, that I'm showing you, because you're not supposed to put all words on slides, but for a webinar, it's a little bit different than an in-person presentation. And finally, if you're able to and you want to get an agent, or even having an assistant help you contact groups, because you only have so many hours in the day, and finding your ideal client and getting paid should be top of your list. You have to have help sometimes too. Finally, I'm going to talk about the elephant in the room when it comes to attorneys and lead generation. So I swear a lot of companies out there think that we're just made of money, and that we can just throw money at marketing and lead generation. And it's really not how it works. So I did try lead generation companies. I'm not going to mention the specific companies I used for any part of this presentation. I'm not mentioning any companies. But I have tried some of the lead generation companies. And what I have found with both the legal specific and financial specific is that most of them are not high quality leads. They are low information. They just want free advice, and it's high quantity. So you're paying $25, $50 a lead. So you could be up to $600, $1,000, and none of them will hire you because they just want free advice. It's really hard to get your ideal client from lead generation. Now, if your business model is not looking for more of the high quality, higher paying, and you like volume. Some people, I have bankruptcy attorney friends who high volume is their practice. Then lead generation is a good option for that. I tell people don't give a lot of free advice. Do free education. Call it free education, speaking engagements, content creation versus individual free advice. And that's what we're going to get into in the getting paid side of things, because we're all need to pay our mortgages and rents. Okay. Now you got clients. You've done all these things. You've got a marketing plan in place. You listen to Joanna's webinar and she's telling you how to measure all of it. Now, how do you get paid? The biggest problem I have with attorneys, the traditional attorney, is the whole billable hour. And you have to turn off that part of your brain that says, I can't do this. That's not how we do things, or no one else is doing this. If no one else is doing something, that is a gold mine. That means you have an idea for doing something that no one else has, and you can corner the market on it. You are a marketplace of one if no one else is doing this. If you are out there in the marketplace and you're calling yourself just an estate planning attorney who does simple wills and trusts, you and 95% of the other attorneys are doing that exact same thing. So you have to turn off that part of your brain. Now, keep in mind, we have ethics rules. There are guidelines that we have to follow as attorneys. So I'm not proposing that we avoid those or get in trouble, but you have to think of ways to get out of that attorney mindset of no one else is doing this. And the biggest roadblocks I see with getting paid, confidence in quoting fees. So I had an attorney who came in, was talking to me about her own practice, and she's like, well, I should be charging $2,000. I've looked at my numbers, I've looked at the profit margin, but when I tell them that, I'm so scared they're going to say no. And it's coming across in how she presents herself to the client. And her clients aren't paying what she needs to get paid because she has no confidence in quoting fees. If you go in thinking they're going to reject your fees, they're going to reject your fees. That's how it works. The same attorney was reducing her bills. So she was still doing billable hours. And every time she sent out a bill each month, she would cross off like half of the bill and say no charge, that dreaded NC on there. You're valuable. You have to believe your time is valuable and your expertise is valuable. And the other thing, the biggest roadblock is asking for payment. Human nature, we don't like asking for payment, but you have to be really confident with it. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I came up with how I ask for fees and how I do things. So I am weird in the bankruptcy world. I'm weird in every world, but the bankruptcy world specifically. Most bankruptcy attorneys do free consultations. That is their marketing, and most attorneys do that, to be honest, from most of them I talk to. You do not have to do free consultations. It is not required by the bar. It's not required anywhere. The market may or may not dictate it, but I can tell you that I'm probably one of the only attorneys in the Bay Area not doing free consultations as a bankruptcy attorney, and I'm really busy. So you do not have to do free consultations, but, so I have this little but with the ellipses there, you have to be able to explain why your consultation is of value to them versus a free consultation. So the way I started out with this, I met with a marketing coach back in 2014 or 13. So I got into bankruptcy in 2010. Bankruptcy was huge, booming, the recession was going, it was a great place to be. And it was fairly easy to get clients. And as the economy was getting better, I could see it slowing down. And I could see in the future that it may not be always just rolling through my door. And so I started thinking, okay, what am I seeing that I could help with? I had a lot of clients who didn't need bankruptcy, but they needed advice on debt and credit. So that's when I got rid of the B word. And I met with a marketing consultant and we did a 9-month coaching program that was fairly inexpensive. And he's like, what happens if you charge for a strategy session versus calling it a free consultation? Like, oh, I can't do that. No one does that. First clue, no one does that. I should have jumped right on it. I didn't know as much back then. And I was like, no one's going to pay for this. And he's like, aren't you valuable? I said, yes. So I started out at $75. I was scared to death. Speaking of no confidence, totally scared at how this was going to work. I had more people at $75 than I had at $0. So within about 6 months, I upped it to $150. I'm like, I'm going to double it. I need to slow down a little bit because I was getting too much business, and had the same problem. Business increased at $150. Now I'm at $199 for a session. And I do like that price point because it's still affordable for people who are not rolling in money. And I think everyone should have affordable legal advice, and they can pay at one time. Like, it's just a block of time, that session they buy. They don't have to pay a big retainer or anything like that. They can just get advice for their situation. Because what I found is people who came into my office had made really bad decisions up until that point because they were afraid to ask for advice, that it was going to be too expensive. So I don't do free consultations. I have developed products and services that no one else in my field offers. For example, if you go to my website, you will see that I have a whole bunch of different strategy sessions. I have a debt strategy session. I have a credit report review session where we go through their credit report. I have a student loan strategy session for those clients who think they don't have debt, they just have student loans. I have a premarital strategy session before people get married and they want to talk about their finances and their debt and how it's going to affect each other. They're all laid out on there so people can identify where they fit. They're all the same session. There's nothing different about any one of them except how the client looks at it in their mind. So if you can come up with things like that, make products out of services. And then I started out thinking I had to do what everyone else did. And my business got infinitely better when I realized that if I do something different, I get paid a lot more. Part of getting paid is explaining your value. So speaking of videos, when I first started charging, I was so afraid to explain to clients why I charge. People will call up and say, so all the other bankruptcy attorneys I talked to said they do free consultations. You don't do that. I'm like, nope, I don't do that. And I wrote a script. I literally wrote a script out of what I was going to say to these people so that I could explain what my value was. And I said, if you come into my office, we're going to go through all of your finances. We're going to talk about what your long-term goals are. I'm going to give you 4 to 6 options. Some of them are better than others. You get to decide at the end what route you want to go and what you want your future to look like. When they called the other bankruptcy attorneys, the bankruptcy attorneys gave them a free consultation that said, yes, you qualify for Chapter 7. Yes, you qualify for Chapter 13. Here's what I recommend. Do you want to sign up? Basically is how it was going. So write a script out. If you have a problem explaining your value, write it down and practice it. I know it sounds cheesy. You don't have to do it in front of a mirror, but record it. I do a lot of recording of myself to figure out how it's coming across to others. Also, if you can explain to people that a few $100s now can save thousands later, that is key, especially if you can give them concrete examples. I use this often with, for example, Chapter 7 bankruptcy. A client comes in, has $80,000 of credit card debt, which is not abnormal, by the way, $80,000 of credit card debt, and I tell them it's going to cost them $3,000 for me to eliminate all of that debt. $3,000 doesn't sound nearly as bad as $80,000. You have to put it on those terms of this is what you're getting for your investment of $3,000. You can't go into it saying, I know this is expensive. I know it's going to be hard for you to come up with this. You have to sell them more on the value that they're getting out of your service. So explain your value and what you're going to do for them. Finally, all attorneys should go through sales training. If you have not been through sales training, you should. There are all kinds of programs out there. It doesn't have to be elaborate. It doesn't have to be expensive. But sales training, especially where you understand personality types, is key to understanding how to get the client to pay you the fastest. Because some people are like me. If you've ever heard of a DISC profile or Myers-Briggs, things like that, you're going to find me on the very, very edge of insanity, where I don't care about all the details. I want to know what's the bottom line, and can you give me the bottom line in 30 seconds or less? When I identify a client like that in my office who's the exact same as me, my consultation that I charge $200 for is 15 minutes long, because I've identified within a few minutes what their personality is like and what I need to say in order to get them to go with the best option. Now, I'm not selling things that they shouldn't have. I think people think sales training is sleazy, or sales can be a sleazy thing. It's more getting yourself in front of a client and talking their language is how sales should be looked at. So sales training, very important. And I know that's not something most people tell attorneys. I'm a big proponent of getting rid of the billable hour. And I know that's controversial. And I know there are people out there who will say, I can't do that. My practice area doesn't allow that. I guarantee there's someone out there in your field doing it. But there are things that you can get paid for instead of an hour. The first thing is value to the client, which is value pricing. And that's what I was just talking about with the Chapter 7, where you're saying the value to you is I'm getting rid of $77,000 of debt. That's the value to you. So the $3,000 price tag doesn't look nearly as scary as the $80,000 in debt. You can do online courses. Of course, you have to make sure you follow all the rules, legal disclaimers, you're not giving legal advice, all of that. I built a course for people coming out of bankruptcy that want to just understand basic personal finance. So there's no legal advice involved. It's just talking about credit scores, what goes into a credit score, how to rebuild, what to look for with car loans, stuff like that. It's basic information that people need. And so I built that course a couple years ago, and it's an automated thing where people buy it and it just goes into my bank account. So being able to create different streams of income will help with your firm as well. Books, if you're a writer, books can be very helpful. It doesn't have to be a long book. It can be like a short downloadable book, but it's also good for selling. If you decide you want to put on Amazon, self-publishing is so easy these days that if you create something, you put it out there, and you can get a graphic designer to create a cover for you in a day. It's really easy to have a virtual assistant or a graphic designer do that. Consulting. So I have got into a little bit of a niche market with consulting because there are a lot of times where the threat of bankruptcy can help in civil litigation or a divorce situation where we're looking at what is the situation going to look like if we go down this path. So there are a lot of professions you can consult with, give advice on, set yourself up as the expert for consulting. Along the same lines as subscription models, I know a lot of business attorneys are doing this these days, where they'll be like the general counsel for a company and they'll set it up as a subscription model. And there's some good materials out there. There are some good attorneys doing things like this. But I encourage you to find ways to make recurring income happen in your practice, because that builds stability and gives you the ability to continue to ramp up your practice. And finally, you can get paid for consultations. Please don't think that you have to do free consultations, no matter what anyone else in your practice area is doing. I talked for longer than I actually thought I would.
You're great.
For 37 minutes here, but I think I saw some questions popping up in there.
Okay. Oh yeah, we definitely. First, before we get to the questions, just let me say, I'm a marketing professional. I've been doing marketing forever. And as I'm listening to Jen, I'm thinking, oh my God, she knows her marketing. And the more you talk, and the more you talk, I'm like, she could teach a whole MBA. Like, this is amazing wealth of questions. So I'll ask you the questions, and then I have some questions too.
Yeah, sure.
So the first question we received, any recommendations for transition from a full-time salary job to a startup? Keep your day job and side business, side hustle? What do you think?
So yes, provided that your full-time salary job allows you to have a side hustle. I had a colleague one time who was working for one of the big legal publishers, and his contract said he couldn't side hustle, and he did. And he got fired from his full-time before he was ready to go. So I do think that keeping your day job for a while, at least while you're planning and marketing and get plans in place. I see a lot of people who start up a practice and there's no plan. It's just, my door is now open. I will either take what walks through, or I'll take, whatever practice area you're in. Having a plan and talking it over. I'm a big fan of mastermind. I'm a big fan of coaching and just brainstorming ideas, because the more you talk to people who are different, the more ideas you'll get to be able to do the side hustle and develop it into a full-time practice area. On the side hustle, also, you may want to look at more of the reoccurring income type stuff, where you have the online courses or you have something that's paying you regularly, so that you have credibility out there when you actually do open up your own firm. So
please don't hesitate to send us any questions.
There's more up there. I think up there.
Oh yeah. Oh boy, in the chat. Yay. Oh, excellent. What networking groups are you a part of besides the one that you run yourself?
Am I allowed to?
Yes.
Okay. I didn't want to promote things that.
No.
So I am in Provisors, which in California is a fairly large networking group for attorneys, bankers, CPAs, financial advisors. So Provisors, as an attorney, most referrals are going to come from other attorneys. We're very specialized to the extent that we stay in our lanes very well. I don't do any estate planning. If someone calls me for estate planning, I'm going to send them to my favorite estate planning attorney. So Provisors is probably the best that I've come across. BNI can be helpful, but it's a weekly meeting, and you have to be strategic about it if you're going to spend that much time in a weekly meeting, which someone else asked about BNI too. So BNI is better if you are in a consumer-facing practice. Bankruptcy attorneys, it works well for estate planning attorneys, family law attorneys, personal injury attorneys. If you are a B2B type attorney where you're a business attorney, it may not be as helpful. I would recommend Provisors over BNI for that reason. And then I run another networking group. It's called Networking Plus. It's a local one. So a lot of times Meetup is a good place to look for networking groups. Being very careful because anyone can start a meetup. You kind of have to evaluate how good it's going to be for your practice. If there are people there that you can relate to, and we'll send you referrals. So networking groups are I find one that's local to you, ask other attorneys, and I'm happy if anyone wants to email me to see if there's one near you that I know of too.
Excellent. I want to get to that, and we're going to get to all the questions. One of the questions I had, it's very similar to here that someone posted. You've referenced obtaining assistance by virtual assistants. I have the same question. How do you find them?
Yep.
How often do you use them, and what's a good budget for them? And are there virtual assistants specifically for the legal market?
So there probably are virtual assistants specifically for the legal market. I don't have one who's specifically for legal, but virtual assistants are really interesting because the more you can outsource to a virtual assistant, the more time you have to work on money generating activities. So I found my virtual assistant on a Facebook group.
Okay.
So I'm in a Facebook group called Boss Moms. It's moms who own their own businesses. There's a lot of MLM in it. A lot of them are good clients for me. It happens to be that way. But I was listening to a podcast one night, which I don't usually listen to podcasts, but I was listening to this one, and they were talking about outsourcing, and there was 100 things that you could outsource, and it was for attorneys. Mm-hmm. And I started writing them down. I was like, oh, that's a great idea. So what I did was I went into that Facebook group and said, I want a virtual assistant who can do these 10 things. And then they all responded. I interviewed 4 of them, and I've had one for a year and a half now, 18 months I've had Laura. And originally I had her at 30 hours a month, and I was paying about $1,000 for 30 hours a month, which to me was a good return. It was like $35 an hour. Now I have her down to 15 hours a month because I had to hire a business manager to manage all the business that was coming in. And so she took some of the duties that Laura had been doing. So Laura now is mostly working on newsletter, content, making sure that my Instagram's updated, all of that stuff, all the things that go in with social media, which we can do a whole presentation. I'm happy to do another one on that. But look for them, ask friends or other attorneys for recommendations. But Facebook is a great place to find virtual assistants and just interview. I had ones from the Philippines, one from Australia that interviewed, one from London. And I basically went with who felt most comfortable with, and also the one who within the hour of our interview was able to get Bernadette, who's my elephant, understand that concept. Yeah. Because that was really important to my marketing.
That's great. So. I personally have worked with virtual assistants in very large organizations, even. That's a great tool if you don't have the overhead to pay someone full time and you need a lot of flexibility. So they work great, and they're interested in the work.
And they're really good at what they do.
Very, very good.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's a simpler one. Where do you send your newsletter, or do you just post it to your site?
Both. So I do have a mailing list. When you go to my website, there's a pop-up that says, please sign up for our newsletter.
What's your?
It's jenleelaw.com, JENLEELAW, just like it sounds. And I don't send it out to anyone who hasn't signed up. So a lot of people will go into a networking group and they'll take the whole list of people who are in the networking group and add it to their newsletter list. That is so annoying to me. So I don't do that. You're not supposed to do it either. It's illegal, spam, right? Yeah. But I'm not a tech attorney either. But people sign up on my website, or clients will agree when they make their appointment, because I have online scheduling on my website for clients. And so they'll agree when they sign up if they want to be opted into the newsletter.
Excellent. Can I ask you how many subscribers you have?
2,000 or so.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's really great.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice on contingency fees, especially in business litigation?
Contingency fees in business litigation. I mean, contingency fees are hard in general because you have to be really good at evaluating the success of a case. You can sink a lot of money into a case, a lot of time, not necessarily money, but you're sinking a lot of time into a case that may not succeed. Mm-hmm. So I've seen a lot of hybrid agreements where it's based on a lower hourly rate and then a percentage of the recovery if there is one. Right. So I would be more comfortable in business litigation doing something like that rather than absorbing all of the cost myself. Yeah.
Your time is valuable. Know your worth.
Exactly.
Exactly. Okay, here's a question. I focus on 3 areas of law. Should I market just one to establish myself as an expert, or should I go for all 3?
So it depends, because that's a lawyer answer, and I love saying it depends. Mm-hmm. It depends on if the 3 areas can be related somehow. If you're able to relate whatever you're doing and make a common connection, I would market yourself with that common connection instead of those 3 areas, because that'll make you different than everyone else. If they're very different areas where you would never go into a networking group and say, I do criminal law and, personal injury, something that was really far apart from each other.
Environmental.
Right, something that's not a good target. So you have to speak to your market. If the person you're talking to can understand what the 3 areas are and that you're good at all 3 areas, that's one thing. But if you're just looking at, I'm talking to a financial advisor, they're going to be most interested in my ability to do taxes or tax litigation than do that. Yeah.
I would say from a marketing perspective too, it also depends where you're located. If you're in a high dense metropolitan area, you want to focus on one. So you stand on that one. If you're in a more rural area, you might want to speak to your different practice areas because you might be the only attorney around.
Yes.
You might have to show your flexibility. Yeah. Here's one that came in through questions. What case management system do you recommend for a new bankruptcy practice?
Well, that's a loaded question.
Oh.
There are all kinds of case management systems out there. Personally, for my bankruptcy practice, I use Practice Panther. I am an all Mac office. We only use Apple. So some of the practice management systems of old are PC based. And so Practice Panther is a cloud-based system. Clio, I did use Clio for 6 years and switched before they launched Clio Grow and they bought Lexicata. So Clio can also be very helpful. The best practice management system is the one that you're going to use. Because I have found that it's great to say you have it, but if you or your attorneys that work for you aren't using it, then it's pretty worthless. So find the features, do the free trials, try them all out. And sometimes the best practice management system is Trello. If you've ever used Trello, it's card-based. We run all of our hearings off of Trello now. We just update in Trello and move cards across through the process.
Excellent.
So yeah.
Excellent. So if you have any further questions, where can they email you, or should they just sign up for your newsletter?
They can email me, jen@jenleelaw.com.
jen@jenleelaw.com. And at the beginning of the webinar, she mentioned the Lawyer Success Network.
On Facebook. Go on Facebook and join the group there. Yeah.
And a couple of other wonderful things that came out. Call it free education, not free advice. Know your value. This is something that goes across any business, not just legal. This is a question I had for you. Do you find that men and women are equally apprehensive about charging for their value, or is it more women?
It's more women. Mm-hmm. And I'm not that I want to stereotype too much, because there are women who are really good at it and men who are really bad at it. Mm-hmm. But I do find that of the ones that I have coached in the past, women are the ones who are the ones marking down their time and being afraid to ask for their value. And I think it's because we're more empathetic sometimes, like we try to relate to their situation.
And we want to be liked.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there is some psychology involved with it. So yeah.
Yeah, I think you can be liked and deliver the goods at the same time and be paid for them.
Yep.
So thank you everyone who attended. We hope to see you in December. We won't see you before then. Have a very, very happy Thanksgiving. I hope you guys all have some downtime. And the next webinar is with Joanna Neves on December 4th. She will be talking about measuring metrics and marketing, which is really a great follow-up to Jen's. Jen, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to
You're
have
welcome.
you.
It was my
really
favorite
fun.
topic. So.
Yes, thank you. Hopefully you'll come back in the spring and we talk about other stuff.
You happy to.
Thank you, everyone online. We hope you enjoyed this, and we will let you know where you can get a copy of the recording. Thank you.